started. In this week, basically, we're going to go over really some working, kind of just all about working with data as kind of a blanket statement. But I guess to be particular, we're going to work with a lot of functions. We're going to learn a little bit about some of these different kind of functions and stuff like that, specifically which functions apply to which data types. And these functions are something that you use quite a lot. So you'll notice in the PowerPoints, there's quite a bit of that. The other thing that we're going to kind of go over is these insert, update, and delete statements, which I kind of have gone over those before. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on those necessarily, because I know I kind of went through like a big thing where we were talking about test cases and CRUD statements, and we're going to do a little bit of that today because the main bulk of what I'd like to do is kind of highlight how we go about building a UI map. And there's certainly many ways to do it, but I am just going to kind of highlight the way that I would go about doing it. So anyways, let's start with the weekly content. So I'm just going to jump into the PowerPoint to kind of get kicked off here. All right. So as we all know, and in case you didn't know, there's really a few different types of data. There's with string data. So there's a character, which is basically like a fixed length thing. And if you're used to other programming languages, this is pretty comparable. There's like a char data type, but then there's also a string data type. And char is basically like you basically have to really define like how many characters. Varchar stands for variable character, and it can hold variable length strings. And then in the last one is a text, and a text is, I know we kind of hit this a little bit in the last week or so, where how do we store text that's longer and it holds very large text. So basically a text is a little bit bigger. And someone brought up a good question last time, which was, when do we use which? And really the idea is that you want to obviously have enough storage to hold the data you want to store, but you also don't want a ton, because every time we have a row in that database, we're kind of allocating that much space that could possibly be used, because at any point we might fill that with data. So you don't want to just balloon everything. You want to keep it just right. All right. And so obviously with strings, there's what's called a string literal, which is basically just a character in quotes. And we've kind of seen that before, where, you can kind of just select data, insert data, or compare data based on a string literal. And let's just kind of skip through some of this stuff. So that's just kind of showing you a little trick. Like if you want a single quote inside of your text, you just put two of them and that works. Special characters always get interesting. This is one, there are a couple of these kind of questions on the quiz. So you'll just want to kind of see how you can use the char function to kind of, build out some of those special characters. So char is a function that lets you use a specific character set. All right, and there's a couple of these like length, and I don't want to spend too much time on these because they're pretty self-explanatory, and more things that you kind of look up as you kind of go, in my opinion. And so, not that you need to absolutely 100% commit these to memory, just like any function, but just kind of know they exist. So obviously we can get the length of characters and strings. We can look at for positions of certain characters in strings, so which is really nice. That way you can kind of, if you're looking for a specific particular portion of a string, you can go about that. Locate, same thing. You kind of locate certain characters within a string. Let's see if there's any one of these. String compare will tell you if it's true or false, if they compare. The like operator, I think we believe we've seen this before, but if not, this one's really handy. So this is a like operator and I think we covered this when we talked about conditional statements in the where clause, but the like statement lets us kind of find things that are like a certain something, but in this case, they're using it to actually get a count of whether it's true or not. So for example, does it end in Y? So it's just a bit yes or no. Does it end in Y? Basically a shortcut for a case statement. Anyway, so a couple others, and like I said, this one actually has quite a bit of them, so don't want to get too crazy here. One of the more useful ones, I think, is Substring, and that lets you kind of take a portion of data out. So, for example, let's say you want to take certain data. One of my favorite things to do is you actually combine the substring function with the locate function, and then that way you can like say, oh, I want to locate where there's a semicolon, and I just want to take the data after the semicolon or the colon, if you have like a key value pair in JSON or something like that. So lots of ways you can kind of combine multiple functions together, which is really handy. Obviously, numeric data, you can do arithmetic functions, lots of the normal type things. These ones are useful for rounding, that sort of thing. Number precision is something that you want to be aware of. The way you round can obviously change things, so on and so forth. And probably the biggest one where I would probably spend the most time here is in the time functions, date time. So in a lot of these date time, obviously one of the biggest ones is if you have a string date and you want to convert that to an actual date time value, you can do that. So in this case, they're taking a string and they're converting it to a date time. And then you can also go back the other way where you, or I guess this is still the same way. So string to date, where basically we're taking a, because a lot of time our date values come in all sorts of different formats. So we just have to take that and put it back into a format that can then be actually used as a date. So in this case, it's taking the month full name, the day of the month, and then the year. And you can kind of see, basically you just tell it where the data is and what data it is. All right, temporal functions. So date add is a good one. Like if you want to say, oh, what's the day 5 days from now? So like, let's say you're creating a booking for a hotel and you want to, calculate the checkout date. This is, kind of how you would do that. You could say date add. They name the one that they're missing here. So there's date add, but there's also a date underscore sub that works the same way, just date subtract, which works just the same, just the other way. This one's also handy. You can extract various components of the date. So like if you want the year from a date, you can extract the year from the date, or extract the month, day, all the different portions of the date you can kind of get out. You can find the difference between two dates. So for example, how many days are between 2019 903 and 2019 621, and there's 74 days. And you can change the interval. So this function will only return full days. All right. So anyways, lots there, but I kind of wanted just to kind of preview it. This is one of those weeks that I think the best way to kind of get it is to find a good resource for looking it up. And for me, that is actually on the MySQL documentation, which they have linked here. I actually like it because it gives you all the options and it's just organized really well. So this is our string function and operators, and then it kind of goes through each one. And then it has numeric function and operators. So you can kind of click over here and kind of get all these different types. So for example, on the string functions and operators, if we wanted to say, oh, I want the first so many characters of a string, I can use this left function and it returns the leftmost length characters from the string. So in this case, we can, get the first ones. Anyways, this is kind of like my go-to source. I just like it because they're all there, and really easy to kind of find because most of the time it kind of makes sense. So anyways, that's kind of the best there. All right. Let's see. So insert, update, and deletes. That's kind of where we'll hit next, but I kind of want to do that in conjunction with our UI map. So I'm going to real quick pull up, I believe that I had a project going on where basically I was making a family cookbook. Yes, they seem super functional. All right. So this is kind of where we ended off the last time we kind of really dove into final projects. And that was when we were still kind of putting together our ERDs. And many of you have your ERDs done now. And now you're moving more into, okay, now I need to start working on my UI map. And this is really kind of the meat of it, is when we actually build like all of our CRUD statements. So let's just review real quick our model here. And let's see if we can find where that is. I know I have that file here, so we'll just open this up. So this is kind of our model, just a cookbook. So to refresh any memories, basically we have a family cookbook. So it's organized by family. So basically a system user signs up, they can create a family. Someone's the owner of that family. They can add other users as members of that family. And then a family can own multiple cookbooks. So you might have a cookbook for baked goods, soups, however you want to organize it. Family can have cookbooks. And then each cookbook has a recipe, which is as an author. So a user is kind of the one who owns the recipe. And each recipe is made up of steps. And for each step in that process, there's an ingredient that's tied to it. And then additionally, like a measuring unit and an ingredient kind of category. So you can kind of organize it. So let me put this off to the side and let's go back over here to our stuff. Let's see. Nope. Oh, it was CRUD. There it is. Okay. So we have our CRUD statements, and this is kind of where I would start in conjunction with your UI map. Actually, I'd kind of start the UI map. So let's jump over there to the UI map. And someone actually used this last semester. It's called Excalidraw. There's a paid service, but if you search for Excalidraw free, this is kind of the one that comes up. So I thought I'd just use this because it's quick to kind of throw up and I don't have to worry about drawing really bad straight lines. So basically I'm going to plan mine as kind of like a web app. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of build my quick little wireframe here. Yay, there's my browser. Okay, so we're on here, and like I said, it doesn't need to be fancy. So basically what I'm going to start with is what I'd like to see is user flow. So as we go along through this process, basically I'm going to walk, and you don't need to show everything, you just need to show some. So basically what I'm going to walk through is maybe how someone signs up, and then maybe how someone, and like I said, you really don't need to show everything. So really what I'll do is I'm actually going to start with just the one process of creating a recipe. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is put some text here. I'm going to say create recipe. And let's make this large. Let's make it very large. I don't know if I can change that font. Ah, yes, much better. As much as I like the hand-drawn look. Okay, so this is kind of like where you can create a recipe. And so now I'm going to start kind of giving these some attributes. So if I go look actually at my thing here, let's see, I don't think I have where I actually create a recipe, do I? No, we just went into how to create your, okay, just for the sake of, since we already have it done. Actually, no, let's go ahead. So we're going to start with a cookbook because we need that one done. So let's create a cookbook. So I'm going to say insert into, I'm going to cheat just a little bit. Family cookbook. I'm going to go here to cookbook and I'm going to copy to clipboard and insert statement. I'm going to take out cookbook ID because it's auto increment column. Family ID this is where we will, I think somewhere here we had a family. So select our family here. And this is why they kind of build. So the more you go along, the more it actually helps you. Because I have this read for my family, I don't have to go and worry about rewriting that. I can just kind of throw this in here. Oh, and I put that in the wrong place. So let's put that here as a subquery. And then our description is we're going to call our cookbook everything potatoes. Everything potatoes, so we stay in line with the fiction because, that one part in Lord of the Rings where they actually make potatoes something. So there's our cookbook. And I am actually going to real quick do my read. Like I said, they come in handy. So I'm going to say select cookbook ID from cookbook where family ID is equal to description is equal to that. So where we'll take everything potatoes. And there we go. There's our read. So now we're to the point where we can actually start kind of going through this. So get to the point where you want to start your flow. And now we're going to start putting in a recipe. And this is where our flow is going to start. So if we go take a look at our recipe, let's see what we need for that. So I'm going to copy to clipboard and insert statement. Okay, so we need a cookbook ID, which we already know is there, but we'll want to be able to select it. So back to our UI, if the first thing that we're going to do is choose which cookbook this goes into, we want kind of like a little drop down, I would imagine. So let's do that. So we're going to say create recipe. Let's add some text here. And we're going to say and it's going to be a little, not like a triangle. I don't know if they have triangles. There's one. That's a drop down. And just to kind of show what it might look like, we have a list of cookbooks. All right. And then the next thing we need, let's go back to here, is author user ID. That's going to be auto-populated based on who's creating it. So we're not going to worry about that. We need to give our recipe a name. So over here, let's say name. You know, and maybe kind of recipe name, you give it a name, yada, yada. You guys get the picture? And let's see what else here. Estimated prep minutes and description. So estimated prep, and maybe over here we'll put minutes. You know what, I'm actually going to make this a little smaller. And then this. So anyways, that's kind of the mock up there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of label this. And while we do it, we're going to write some select statements, because this is where our CRUD and test cases are going to kind of meld up. So I'm going to start a new file over here. And actually, like, you can kind of choose what you want to do. In this case, I'm actually going to kind of keep them all as one. So I'm just going to have one file called CRUD. And you can choose how to do this. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to like some red text. And let's make the font size, let's do large. All right, so our first one, it was our drop-down menu. And this is going to be an R dot, or let's say R.2. So I'm going to kind of like give it an index. Cookbook.R.2. R.1. Let's do R.2. And now I'm going to write the code that will actually go there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select the cookbook ID and the description from cookbook. Now, you know, that might think you're good enough, but the thing is we got to be thinking ahead, and we need to filter it down to where our user is the kind of the person who owns this cookbook. Because obviously they don't want to be able to select some other family's cookbook. So basically what we got to do is, if we look in our at our kind of schemas, we basically got to take this all the way back through the family. So basically from the user to the family. So if we take a look, because we are at, basically we have the system user, we need to go through the family member to get all the families and then all the cookbooks, if that makes sense. All right, so let's take a look here. And real quickly, let's see. I make a mistake here. Okay, so a cookbook does have a family ID. Recipe connects to a cookbook. Okay, perfect. So we're going to select the cookbook ID description from cookbook where, and we're going to have to do some joins. So let's do cookbook CB cookbook ID, CB.description. And we want to join. So we're going to say inner join because we only care about matches. So we're going to, because if obviously if they don't have any cookbooks, we don't care to show anything else. So we're going to go from, not from cookbook, we're going to go from system user. We're going to inner join that with family member. Okay. Build our join there. And then we're going to go from family member to family. Then we're going to go from family to family cookbook, or just cookbook. And this is why being in first normal form is really nice, because I mean, it's a little bit, but that's the way we want. And you can kind of see the chain here. So we start with system user and user ID, family ID, and then family ID. All right, let me make sure that makes sense here. So we're going from family, from user, family to family, and then from family to family. And then we're at all the cookbooks that this user has access to. Let's put this there so we know. And we can actually, let's go ahead and run this and just see what we get here. Oh, so family member doesn't exist. Let's see what we, family underscore member. Table Sakila family underscore member doesn't exist. It's right there. So let's see what's going on. Oh, I am using the wrong one. Let's go up here. We're going to say use family cookbook. Here we go. And there we go. So now you can see we're here, but we're getting an empty result set. And the reason being is because somewhere in here, we're missing some data. If we go look through here, our user is, we have Frodo. I guess let's make sure that they exist. Let's see, let's select everything from user, make sure that we're all there. Yep, okay. Here's our family ID. Let's do a read here. So under family member, we have that. See if we're getting our cookbook here. There we go. Did I ever run this? I don't know if I ever ran a create there. There we go. Okay, so now this should work. Let's give this another shot. And there's our cookbook. So now we have our select statement that's going to pull the options for our dropdown. And when we actually build dropdowns in HTML, basically what it is you have your ID that corresponds to your description. So basically you have a value that's kind of like on the back end and the value that shows. So this would be the cookbook.description. So I'm actually going to go ahead and we'll call that good there. I'm going to change this to a capital though. There we go. Okay, so that's our read. And then the one last thing I forgot is we need a button to save. So let's just make a big button here. Let's make it green. Nice green button. Save. All right, so that is kind of like our recipe screen. You know, we can kind of label this too. So let's just do that. Very large. Recipe create one. And I'm going to scroll down here because then the next step is we need to add steps to our recipe. We're going to take our little screen here, build another one. I'm going to see if I can get faster at this. Then we're going to take them where they can edit the recipe. And then we're going to say, basically that's where, you know, where you can kind of hold the recipe name. Let's give a nice little line here. Make it look kind of good. All right. So when we edit the recipe, kind of what I'm thinking is I kind of want like a list of steps, and then like each one you can kind of add to. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one box over here that's kind of the generic information, like what we had here. So basically, and again, we don't need to do this over, but basically a cookbook ID. Basically the cookbook name and description. Let's see if we can just kind of pop these in here. First time using this program, but I kind of like it. Now on this screen, because you know you kind of create it to get it started, but on this screen there's going to be kind of like an update. Like really, this is going to say update, and this is kind of going to save this information on top. And so this one's going to have a little bit going on. It's going to have both an update and a read, which we'll get to in a minute. But right now, I kind of want to go over the step process here. So over here, let's create a step. And this is going to be kind of like a little table where each step is going to kind of have a box. It's going to have a little scrolly on it. Scroll bar. Technically, this is the sequence. And then down here, we're going to have medium. Anyways, you kind of get the idea, and I don't want to bore too much. So basically what I'm going to do is we are going to just real quick kind of select some of this stuff. anyways, get the idea. So let's real quick, I do want to go over some of these. So the first one over here is because we've created this. So kind of the flow I'm thinking is you start off by kind of giving your recipe a name, because maybe, you know, the worst thing is when you got to do everything at once, or especially in web applications. I really don't like when you have to kind of like start building something or start doing something and then you come back and your authentication timed out, so you lose everything. Like there's just nothing worse. So what I like to do is I like to kind of um break things in steps. So like you can have like a recipe that's like a work in progress, and you know, maybe we should have added a publish button. These are the kind of things you come across when you start kind of putting stuff together. And that's why we do the wire. That's why we go through this process, is because like now that I'm thinking about it, oh, you know, I probably do want to, you know, basically control like, oh, this is a recipe that I'm still putting into the computer versus something else. So let's start here. I'm gonna do a r dot. See, and this is a recipe dot read. How do I do that? Recipe dot r dot 2, I believe, is what we're on. Really, it doesn't matter. There's that recipe 2, and while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and add another one. We're going to say recipe dot u dot 1, and that is going to go to. Oh, cool! You can make it kind of connect. This is a really neat thing here. Let's do that. Connect to that box. Okay, and so the reason that we have that is because we need to write an update statement and a read statement. So coming back here under our recipe, there's an r.1 that's missing. So r.2 is we want to select everything from recipe where recipe ID is equal to 1. You know, pretty simple, because basically we're going to show all the information from there. You know, our cookbook one obviously is going to be part of that, but I don't require you to get that granular. So we're going to do that. And real quick, I'm just going to do my R1, which is just select recipe ID from recipe where name is equal to, I guess I haven't inserted one yet. So boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. So that'll be the recipe we create. So r.2, and then let's write an update statement. So update recipe. We're going to set name equal to, I guess it's cookbook. Set cookbook ID equal to 1. And, you know, and this is where you can kind of just make stuff up, because, you know, we'll probably never run these. So it's just a matter of showing that it's possible. Better potato stew. And estimated prep minutes equal to 12, or let's do 45, and description is equal to one. Here we go. Okay, so there's update 1. So you can kind of see how basically what we're doing is we're walking through each thing and kind of building out what would happen theoretically. And I think I need an insert on this one. So let's do that as well. create one, insert into, oh, I have it right there. We just didn't finish it, got carried away. All right, our cookbook ID, we're just going to set that equal to, and this is where I get to come up here to cookbook and grab our thing to use here as a subquery. The reason I use subqueries is that way as you kind of build things, it'll always work regardless of ID. So I try to kind of stay away from IDs for the most part, especially for my inserts, because the inserts you kind of want in there. The updates and stuff, you want to make sure they work, but you obviously don't need to always kind of keep them in there. So let's do potato stew. It's not something you're going to be running all the time. Original is 30, and our description is going to be I'm going to run that one to create it. There we go. And that is C1 because I think we forgot that one up here. So let's do. You can kind of see what's happening. And really what I should do is this is going to be recipe.name, recipe.description. I don't remember what that's called. Now you get the point. All right. So and then on and on would go. I'm gonna make a little button here for add step. Green, yada yada. Anyway, so you guys get the point. You basically walk through flow. So if I were to kind of go finish this, I would basically get mine to the point to where you you create your recipe, you can edit your recipe, add steps, maybe like delete steps. Let's put a little trash can here. Don't have one. Take our hand at drawing a trash can. Beautiful trash can. All right, so various things. So this would obviously be your deletes and so on and so forth. So, and this would actually be a recipe step. So, and we don't have that, but what is the name of that? It is called just a step. Step.d.1. anyway, so on and so forth. You can kind of get the idea where basically you can kind of mock it out and do it. And so just to kind of finish off, what I would just so you kind of have scope to finish mine off, I would also have a screen where basically I can put in the steps. So let's see. Really, I should save some of this stuff because I'm guessing you can save some of this to your library. Now I'd probably have like a step editor. And then probably have like a place where you can kind of view all the recipes. No, I don't think in mine I put like a place to have like images, but probably would have been wise. In hindsight. Anyways, yada yada. You guys kind of get the picture. Anyways, does anyone have any questions about this? I don't want to waste too much time if this makes sense. So does anyone have any questions about any of this kind of stuff? Anything particular you're curious about or want clarification on?
There like a number of these frames that you're looking for, you'd be wanting?
No, basically what I'd like to see is like the main flow. So like for example, like my whole thing is about managing recipes. So I want to be able to create a recipe and then view the recipes in the cookbook. So like that's kind of the flow. So for example, if you were doing a shop, I would kind of expect to see, oh, this is how I view the products. This is how I, add an item to my cart. This is where I check out, this is where I see my orders, like that to me would be like a good flow. So no set amount, just more just like kind of like show like a given flow.
For some of the things, like earlier when you were doing the, I think it was when you were writing like the update, where description equals and then a string. Do we need to have like mock info there, or are we having like variables there? How does that get, I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Cause like, really like, cause the application isn't like talking to the code. So basically I just kind of, just throw in mock data.
Okay.
So I kind of like to use, I like to use subqueries in kind of lieu of where the program would feed in data. So for example, if I'm editing a recipe, if I'm editing this recipe, the application is already going to know what recipe I'm on, that I'm editing.
Mhm.
And so we would pass that data along. So really what I do is I kind of like throw in some mock data, or in this case, I really like to use the subqueries, because that way, if I end up, deleting everything and reinserting things, it doesn't change to like, oh, all of a sudden now my ID's 2 because I deleted the first one. Because if I were to delete the potato stew recipe without erasing my entire table, if I just said, oh, delete, that one recipe and then create a new one, even though there's only one record in the table, that ID is still going to be 2. So all of a sudden, like all my like fake code doesn't work. Now I'm not going to be necessarily running your code, so it doesn't matter too much, but it is nice. Like I would expect you to kind of test this so you can make sure it works. So like if I wanted to check my update, it didn't work. Where I can't specify basically because of this subquery. So in this case, I think this one actually doesn't let you do that. So anyways, you get the kind of idea. Basically, you just throw in some like I said, some fake
Okay.
data. I use subqueries where I
Yeah.
can, and yeah, it's really just like a proof of concept. To to kind of say like, oh, because realistically, like, and I like to kind of treat this, ever since I've seen this, I'm like, wow, this is actually like really good prep. Like if you ever wanted to make something and like wanted to go maybe talk to investors, once you get to the point where you have all this, really it's just about making the UI, but everything's kind of proof of concept in the background.
Okay.
So you said you would run an update. Are we actually going to be building out like a table with some data, and are we putting stuff in there to be able to run something?
Yes, all your tables, I mean, technically they don't actually have to hold data, but you have to write all the SQL to fill it. And so I would actually fill it up with data, and it doesn't have to be full. It just has to have, you at least
Some.
have to have one insert statement per table for the CRUD requirement. Because basically one of the deliverables is a CRUD file, which is basically a create, read, update, and delete. So basically an insert, a select statement, an update statement, and a delete statement for every table. Now, if you went above and beyond and created like 30 tables, obviously I don't expect you to have all of them. But honestly, like depending on your mock-ups and what you do for your test cases, because see, and I'm kind of convoluting these because a lot of these are my test cases as well, which is fine. You'll probably need data in them to really kind of make your test cases work, depending on where how everything's connected.
When you were doing the recipe, I don't know, steps or ingredients or something, and you had your deletes on there, I mean, are you like, how are you differentiating each of those items just based on their actual ID in the table, or right? Am I
So you're
understanding that right?
talking here?
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
when
so
I go to say delete, whatever step one is, right? Delete this, and then it would have, I would match up the name of the step in that subquery, right?
yeah, and most of the time you do it by ID. Like technically, like the application, like because the application is basically going to know like when you build, like when you actually would write the UI code, it would basically say like, oh, when I click this button, take me to a specific URL or send a specific signal to the API or database or whatever that deletes that specific step ID.
Okay.
But for us, really, like, so I usually just kind of do that by ID. So like that's why in my test cases, like most of this is by ID, like update by ID and so on and so forth. So I like to do mine by ID just so it's kind of to that step, because that's where it's going to end up. But really doesn't matter too much. But and then these are just kind of the I guess the labels for
Right.
where I connect it to my code.
Okay, and of course, just, you know, that mock-up of the build out, so it doesn't have to be specific, but know that we understand that process, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And basically I kind of, yeah, like, and it doesn't need to be like 100% fleshed out, you know, like for example, this is really just, you know, like, oh, this is how I got this data, you know, for basically this whole screen. I guess this one actually is just for the cookbook drop down, you know, so, oh, this is how I get the data for the drop down. This is how I get the, you know, when I hit save, I'm going to run the create statement with this data in it, you know. If I hit delete, it's going to run, you know, the delete code and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And really it's just so, because we actually, they actually do this pretty frequently. And it's really so as like the designers start going through all this, they can basically it's like plug and play at that point. Because then once, you know, they build the UI and then, you know, when they're connecting these things, really the CRUD statements are for APIs. And so everything is going to kind of run through that API. You've probably heard of REST APIs, which is really just CRUD statements. You know, if I want to create a new record, update a record, read a record, update a record, or delete a record. And so really everything kind of revolves around that. The only kind of offshoot to that is like, oh, I need to select certain data. You know, and sometimes those get a little bit more convoluted, more than just like one specific table, but yeah, still read. Questions?
So I submitted my paper with my project last week. Do you want me to message you and say, hey, can you give me some suggestions or feedback on it, or what's the process for that?
Yeah, if you want to, because I haven't gotten to last week papers yet. So if you want to shoot me, really the best thing is if you want to shoot me your actual MWB file, or if like if you're not to that point yet, whatever you have. But if you have like your MWB file, what I do is I'll just open it up and, you know, make any edits and kind of like do a quick little like, oh, this is kind of like why I did whatever. And then that way, if you choose to keep them, you have it. And if not, at least you have like, you know, all the details. So instead of like trying to like walk through it, you know, that way it's just a little bit easier where we're usually like passing notes. That way it's like, oh, you know, here's all the changes, and I can just go ahead and do it rather than try to type it out. And then that way, if you want them, it's not like we're replicating that much work.
So just send it through Canvas to you?
Yep, Canvas, Teams, or email. Either any of those will work.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So anyways, just to kind of finish off, this is kind of where I would start directing my efforts. Like, hope, you know, and it's okay to kind of have to go back to your database if you want. And it's also okay, like if things are really, really bad, you know, just make it work and make notes. That's kind of what I like to tell people. In fact, a big part of the presentation, I always like to say, make a slide or more on what might have you've done differently now that you've gone through the whole process. I mean, because obviously this is most people's first times. I obviously don't expect it to be super slick the first go around. So if you have mistakes, don't stew too much, like if it doesn't work or whatever. And like with your test cases, obviously I expect them to be, you know, formatted for the most part. But like I said, I'm not going to build your database from scratch and test it and run it and dock points if you know this didn't work right when I ran it in order or whatever. So, you know, it's really more each one of these little statements, CRUD or test case, are really should be isolated. And I really look at them more just to kind of say like, oh, you know, interesting, you know, like how would we go, you know, just to kind of make sure it all kind of ties out and that you've basically that you're, you know, thinking through things. Because like, for example, you know, on this one, if we were just selecting the recipe, it's not going to be select everything from recipe semicolon, because that would select all the recipes. You I want to make sure, make sure we're filtering down to a specific recipe and so on and so forth, those kind of things. But yeah, so what I would do is, like I said, I would want to run these, especially the select ones. The create statements and the select ones are the most important. Those are the ones that I kind of key in on the most, just because I think you want to be creating these records, and then B, because you also want to kind of try out your query to say like, oh, what would I get if I run this? Because I want to make sure I have what I need here. Just like when I go to run this, this step here is going to get interesting because I've got to not only select the recipe steps, but I've also got to select the recipe ingredients for each step. So, I'm going to actually have like a query that's going to, kind of do that join for each one of these boxes. Now, you don't need to write one for each one of the boxes, just want to work, but, just select like select the recipe step, interjoin step ingredients where recipe ID is equal to, whatever, and that kind of thing. All right. Cool. Anyways, if you need this Excalidraw, if you are completely clueless on what to wireframe in, this is my first time using this, and it actually is pretty great for this. So if you want to give that a shot, I will actually shoot out this URL with the announcement. But anyways, does anyone else have any other questions? Or we're actually right just after the hour, so.
Very helpful. I'm good. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Yep. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, good luck. If at any point you're kind of confused, because like I've been there, like I don't want you confused about like, am I doing this right? So, if you're going along and you're like, ooh, is this right? Or, make sure I'm on the right direction. Don't be afraid just to shoot me a note real quick with like a screenshot or whatever. And, more than happy to make sure we're staying on the right path. So that way you don't have to sit there and worry about it, because the worst part is worrying about it. And most of the time you're on the right track. So, but anyways, good luck this week, and thanks for being here, and let me know if you need anything.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.